Jazz is RSVP. Rare songs, very personal. One KDHX. Welcome once again to the show, everyone. I'm your lady, Edie B, on this beautiful night in St. Louis. This is our final show for April, the month of Marvin, 2024. And we started off everything on April 7th with a 2-hour show of music composed by and covered by Marvin Gaye. Hope you enjoyed that show. Then on Sunday, April 14th, we re-aired the interview Michael Bishop and I did with the one and only Mickey Stevenson, the first A&R man for Motown Records, where Mickey Stevenson confirmed that Marvin Gaye did want to be a jazz singer. And then last week, on April 21st, we re-aired our interview with Art Stewart, who was a longtime sound engineer for Marvin Gaye and was the man behind the board in 1979 when Marvin finished the ballads arranged by the great Bobby Scott 10 years prior. Now, we just about covered it, right? I was so grateful for those interviews. They helped me finish my plays, and I am grateful that Mr. Art Stewart and Mickey Stevenson was nice enough to share their stories with me. And I consider these interviews historic interviews, yes indeed. However, there was something that kept bothering me. I was able to read how Marvin Gaye felt about Bobby Scott from his autobiography written by David Ritz. Still, I could not find any words written anywhere about how Bobby Scott felt about Marvin Gaye and the Marvin Gaye-Bobby Scott collaboration. Then one day, a couple of years ago, a man by the name of Wayne Corelli, who is an amazing singer and master pianist, and he attended Berklee School of Music. He contacted me via my website, Jazz in My Soul, and he had read about my play, and it turns out that Bobby Scott was his mentor. And yes, Mr. Scott had talked about Marvin Gaye. I was elated. So tonight, I'm going to share that interview with you for those of you who have not heard it. And if you've noticed, the other interviews, I was able to just grab the sound out about Marvin Gaye and play that. But tonight, I'm starting this interview from the beginning because Mr. Curley said some really, really nice things about me that I wouldn't dare say about myself. So, so I'm going to play that for you. So, ladies and gentlemen, here's parts of my interview with vocalist, master pianist Wayne Corelli. Enjoy. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the show. You know I've been teasing my listeners for a while now with the promise of bringing on a very special person, and that time has finally arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome to the show master pianist and vocalist Wayne Corelli. How you doing, Wayne?
I'm doing better now.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Mr. Corelli. And I want to thank you for your patience. I don't know, I've had to reschedule a couple of times, but I appreciate. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Great. I met Mr. Corelli through my Jazz in My Soul website. He reached out to me because of the great Bobby Scott, and Mr. Bobby Scott was his mentor. And in case you don't know who Bobby Scott is, Bobby Scott is this brilliant singer, songwriter, arranger, producer who arranged some songs for the late, great Marvin Gaye. And those songs are the songs that I wrote about in a play that I call Jazz in My Soul, a Marvin Gaye fantasy. But before we ask Mr. Corelli about Mr. Scott, I want to talk about you, Mr. Corelli, and your career. So tell me how you started off your career.
Well, actually, if it's okay, you stole my line because I wanted to talk about you for just a minute before we proceed.
Wow.
to quote Mr. Eckstein, I just want to talk about you because
Okay.
I want to say congratulations to you on your recent induction into the Black Women in Radio Hall of Fame.
Oh,
That was in the Library of Congress in Washington D.C. a few weeks ago,
well, aren't you
and
nice? Thank you.
yeah, I'm not really sure how many people actually in your audience were aware of that fact, but I hope I feel like I needed to at least bring that to light. And also, I want to say, and this is an unbiased comment also, that I've spent a lot of time in most of the major cities in this country: Boston, New York,
Hmm.
Philly, Miami, Chicago, LA, San Francisco. And obviously, when you're in those cities, you listen to the local radio stations. And I just want to say, once again, unbiased, that you are without a doubt the hippest jazz radio personality on the air today, anywhere, period. So there
Wow.
you go.
Now, did one of my relatives call you up and ask you to say those nice things to me?
Absolutely not. Like I said, that was an unbiased statement from the heart and totally accurate and sincere.
Well, I really thank you. I'm so glad that I've got it on tape.
There you go.
Well, okay, Mr. Curley, thank you so much. But we want to know about you. I want to talk about you. Let us know about how you began your beautiful. You have a beautiful voice, and I'm not just saying that because you just said nice things about me. I've been listening to you for the past few months or so, and you have an incredible voice, and you're a master pianist. And let us know how all of that got started.
I grew up in the South Jersey area, which is like a suburb of Philadelphia, in a little town called Vineland, New Jersey. And my father was a self-taught musician, played keyboard, piano, and guitar, and was a jazz lover. And I had an older brother. I should say I have an older brother, and grew up with an older brother who was pursuing music as a career. And he was also into jazz. So there was a local station in the Philly area at the time. We're talking now like the early 1960s, and it was called WHAT,
Hmm.
96.5 FM. And it was a great station. They were always playing, Miles and Coltrane and everything that was happening in those days on the jazz scene. And it was, my brother was always listening to the station, and I would literally, like, let's just say, like at age 8, I'd be falling asleep at night listening to Miles and Coltrane,
Wow.
George Shearing, Oscar Peterson, Bill Evans, that whole crowd, which is eventually when I got older, I just was naturally drawn to that music. And like I said, my father was into it also. He was a big Earl Garner fan, especially. And so I grew up with my father and my older brother really being, lovers of jazz.
Hmm.
So it became part of my life. That's how it all started there. Yeah.
So where'd Bobby Scott come in?
Well, actually, Bobby Scott goes back to my days of listening to that radio station, WHAT,
Hmm.
in Philly. They used to play Bobby Scott and Frank Durone quite a bit on there, and I was always really attracted to their style of singing. At the time, I didn't realize that Bobby Scott was actually, the musician that he was, piano player, singer, arranger, composer, so I just know him as a singer. I'm like 13 years old. I'm listening to the radio, and I'm hearing him every day. And so I became a fan of Bobby Scott, and really not knowing too much about him, just knowing that I liked the way he sang. And
Hmm.
then fast forward to 10 years later, I'm having a conversation with a gentleman who was a fantastic arranger by the name of Manny Album. And he was like adjunct faculty at a local college here in South Jersey. It's now known as Rowan, but back in those days it was a state college known as Glassboro State College. Anyway, we're talking around 1973, 74, I guess. And I'm talking to Manny about my appreciation for Bobby Scott, and I was trying to talk Manny into writing some arrangements for me in the style of like Bobby Scott, And he said,
Hmm.
well, and he looks at me and he goes, well, man, he goes, if you like him so much, he goes, why don't you call him up and ask him? You know? And I'm like, really? He goes, yeah. He goes, he lives right up the road, man, right up the turnpike, North Jersey or outside New York City. So anyway, Manny Album opens up this little black book and gives me Bobby Scott's phone number. And sure enough, I call him up, and it was just like I felt like I was calling God. It was like I dialed his phone number, and he answered the phone, hello, and it was like, I swear, it was just like I had called God, and God answered the phone, and so anyway, I told him why I was calling. I said, I got your number from Manny, and I've been a long-time fan of yours. And, Manny said that I should probably come up and talk to you in person. So he said, yeah. So he gave me his address, and I drove up to Cliffside Park, New Jersey, up the turnpike, about 2 hours up the turnpike from where I was living. And I met him, and then we kind of hit it off, as friends. And then from that day on, I was like his shadow, whenever he actually really wasn't performing live at the time. He kind of stepped out of the club scene for a minute there. And then, but anyway, he eventually got back into playing in clubs. And when he started doing that, that's when I'd be driving into New York City every night to see him doing live. And then I followed him all over the place, down to Washington, D.C., and down to Annapolis, Maryland, and mostly in New York in the city.
So it didn't take you too long to get really comfortable with him, huh?
No, we hit it off right away, and I think he could sense that I was really super impressed with him, and I think he was, he was about, let me see, he was like 16 years older than me, so I guess he was kind of like feeling the vibe like he was like an older brother kind of a thing to me or whatever, and he could tell that I was totally into whatever he was doing. I was like there watching,
What intrigued you most? What exactly really pulled you in to him?
Well, like I said, the initial thing was just hearing him on the radio when I was like 13 years old, and I just dug his style of singing and the sound of his voice. But then when I started hearing him in smaller settings, like doing just piano, bass, and drums, and he got, his whole approach to singing, and he was always singing great tunes. Bobby Scott was like a walking, talking encyclopedia of the obscure tunes that should be well known. Freddie Cole also had that same attribute. Freddie Cole was always playing tunes that you wish you had heard them more often, and Bobby Scott was the same way. He was always doing great tunes, always leaning into the standards, but finding standards and playing standards that were seldom heard, that, you found it hard to believe that you had never heard them before,
Listen, I want you to tell me about Mr. Scott and the things that you later found out about him. What more do you know about his part in producing and things like that?
Right. Well, Bobby was actually hired by Columbia to be a producer back in the early 60s. And in those days, prior to him working for Columbia full time, he and Quincy Jones knew each other going back into the 50s. And he and Quincy worked on, and Quincy was well along at that point into his career. He was getting, hired to do movie scores. A lot of them ended up on TV, and either The Night and The Pawnbroker are the first two that come to mind. And he and Bobby Scott's on those soundtracks playing piano. But I was told by Bobby and other people that back in those days, Quincy would get hired to do the music, and then lots of times he'd be working on 10 projects at one time. So he would kind of like lay out the overall plan and the sketch, and then ask, like, say, Bobby to, like, here, do this, do that. So a lot of the stuff, it was not only Bobby playing, but he was also contributing as an arranger on a lot of those things, like those movies and other recordings. But he also was eventually a full-time record producer at Columbia, and the list is just hundreds of people that he produced. And back in those days, I'm talking about like singles.
Yeah,
people would go in to record, a couple of tunes to be put on a 45 or something, and everybody, you name it, whoever was like big time in the early 1960s that went through Columbia, Bobby was probably involved with that, Right. But Bobby, getting back to his other activities besides being a producer, I mean, he was, Bobby had a most unusual life. He started out as a child prodigy. He studied classical music initially, composition, and then he got into jazz at an early age as a teenager, and he was like a jazz prodigy. He was like 15 years old, and he's touring with Gene Krupa and Lester Young, and
wow,
people like that as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
It was unbelievable. And then at the same time, when he was doing all that stuff with like Gene Krupa and Lester Young and Louis Prima too, and then he got hooked up with Dick Haymes also, and he also was very active with Bobby Darin. He was Bobby Darin's conductor for quite a while. So he jammed more life. He was only alive for 53 years.
Yeah.
And he jammed more creativity and more life into those 53 years than most people will in 106.
One of the reasons I was so excited about hearing from you is because during the time I was writing my play, Jazz in My Soul, a Marvin Gaye fantasy, it's because I was able to read words that Marvin Gaye had said about Bobby Scott, but I could never find words that Bobby Scott had said about Marvin Gaye. And I was very frustrated about that. But then along came Wayne Corelli. So tell me, Mr. Corelli, what do you know of how Bobby Scott felt about his project with Marvin Gaye?
Well, I do know that Bobby had a total appreciation for Marvin's ability to sing a song. I mean, he definitely appreciated Marvin's ability to sing and to deliver a lyric, to deliver a lyric with conviction and emotion and passion. It's like a storyteller. They have a sound and they have a captivating sound, just like Bobby Scott had his sound, and Carmen McRae, Abby Lincoln, Billie Holiday, Shirley Horn. They all had that sound, and it was a captivating sound, and Marvin Gaye had that. So Bobby often talked about that, but he also, I had lunch, I think I may have told you this, I had lunch once with the bass player, Bob Cranshaw, who was the bass player on the recording session that where Marvin recorded the tracks with Bobby Scott and Bobby's arrangements. And I remember Bobby talking about this too, but Bob Cranshaw was the one who last told me about it. And Bob Cranshaw said that at the recording session, that it was such that Marvin was singing with so much emotion that day and feeling that there were like some of the string players were there with tears rolling down their faces while they were playing.
I would have given anything to be there. Anything.
Yeah, it was. Bob Cranshaw said it was quite an emotional event, and I'm glad that I was able to come across the actual some of the original tracks from that session.
Yeah, you've been doing your homework, because every time I turn around, you're saying, well, check this out. And one of the things that you and I discussed was the fact that Marvin Gaye did different versions of some of those tunes.
Right.
And since he's passed away, the record companies have just released most of them. I won't say most of them, because we don't know how many copies he did. But I was told by Marvin Gaye's one of Marvin Gaye's sound engineers, as a matter of fact, the guy who was with him during the time when he finished the Bobby Scott recordings, that Marvin would have been very upset to know that they released so many of those different versions of those tunes, because a lot of them he didn't like at all. And you even mentioned that when you and I talked about that.
Right. Yeah, I like I said, that's what I meant when I said that I feel fortunate that I was able to finally come across the original tracks that went down in the studio, because obviously, I mean, Marvin had them at his leisure to kind of try and tweak it and get a little creative with stuff, but the original tracks came out beautiful.
Absolutely. Well, so what do you think about Marvin Gaye's singing chops? Do you think he had what it took to be a jazz singer?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, to me, anybody who can deliver a lyric with conviction,
Hmm.
and passion, that's what all the great jazz singers to me, that I mentioned already. Carmen, Abby, Billie Holiday, Shirley Horn, Bobby Scott. They all had that ability, and Marvin was right there with them. And it's just too bad that he never had a chance to record more in that genre, and also do some swing tunes and lay some other stuff down.
Yeah, and get on stage and perform them. It's a shame. But that's
Right,
just what I'm trying to do in my play. I'm trying to make that happen for Marvin
right,
Gaye and Bobby Scott, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
yeah.
Listen, we're going to have to pick this up at another time.
Okay.
I have totally enjoyed talking to you, and I hope I can continue to call you up.
Oh, definitely, anytime.
Thank you so much, Mr. Curley. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye.
I love you for sentimental reasons. I hope you do believe me. I'll give you my heart. I love you, and you alone were meant for me. Please give your loving heart to me, and say we'll never part. I think of you every morning, dream of you every night. Darling, I'm never lonely whenever you're inside. I love you for sentimental reasons. I hope you do believe me. I've given you my heart. I think of you every morning, dream of you every night. Darling, I'm never lonely. Whenever you're in sight, woman, I love you. For sentimental reasons, I hope you do believe me. I've given you my heart.
88.1 KDHX, the late great singer, songwriter, producer, arranger, Bobby Scott. Thank you so much for joining me this year for April, the month of Marvin, on 88.1 KDHX.